Adam here from the KP Movement Institute. In today's video, we're going to be talking about spatial or directional terminology, which is going to be used to help us better understand the relative positions of the different structures within the body. If you haven't already, make sure to like and comment on this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you don't miss any future videos. Let's get going. As we begin to look at anatomical terminology, specifically our spatial and directional terms, it's important for you to understand why you need to know these. When most fitness or health professionals first start out, there can be a lot of confusion and it can feel very overwhelming learning all the muscles, the bones, the joints, the different movements, the different directions and spatial terminology that is used. And you may ask, well, why don't we just use English? Wouldn't that be way simpler to just use English so that I can describe things using the language I already have? And while it may seem like a good idea, there can be a lot of confusion. Because English in and of itself isn't a simple language. There are different ways that I can use inflections in my voice to change the meaning of something. I can have the same word mean different things. I can have multiple words mean the same thing. And so the anatomical language that we used is made up of ancient Greek and Latin to help reduce this ambiguity or this confusion and make sure that no matter where I am on the face of the planet and what language I'm speaking, the anatomical terminology is always the same. It is, in and of itself, its own language. And so this is why it's important to remember all of these spatial terms so that when you are talking or discussing movement or the body with other fitness or health professionals, or perhaps you're reading research or an article or a textbook, you can understand what is being said. So let's look at some of these terms. We're going to start off with anterior, or towards the front of the body. This is also known as ventral. And posterior, towards the back side of the body. This is also known as dorsal. So anterior and posterior, or ventral and dorsal. So as an example, the sternum, the breastbone, is anterior to my scapula or my shoulder blades on the back side of my body. The next one we're going to look at is superior, or above, and inferior, or below. So we also sometimes term these cranial and caudal. So if I am cranial, I'm towards the skull, caudal down towards the bottom of the body. So I can say that my hip is superior to my knee. Or I can say that my pelvis is inferior to my thoracic cage. So I'm using these to denote relative locations of structures within the body. I can also use them to describe specific landmarks or attachment sites on an individual structure as well. Next one we're going to look at is medial and lateral. So if we remember back to our planes of motion video, the sagittal plane is going to separate me into right and left halves, the mid-sagittal planes running straight through my body. So if I'm talking about medial, I'm talking about moving towards or closer to that center point of the body, that midline of the body. And then lateral is either further away from or moving away from that midline. So medial in towards the center, lateral out away from that midline. So I can say that my shoulder is medial to my elbow. It is closer to the midline than my elbow. And then finally, we have proximal and distal. Proximal meaning closer to the torso or the beginning point, the origin of a tissue, and distal meaning further away from the torso or the insertion point of a tissue or the end of a tissue. So if I use my biceps brachii as an example, this anterior upper arm muscle, its proximal attachment is into the shoulder and its distal attachment is into the forearm. No matter where I have these, like my arm, it doesn't change the proximal and distal terms, even though it may change which point of insertion is medial or lateral, depending on the position of the arm. Right? So anterior, posterior, or ventral dorsal denotes forwards and backwards, or front and back. We have superior or cranial, inferior and caudal, denoting up and down. We have medial and lateral, meaning towards the midline or away from the midline. And then proximal and distal, proximal meaning closer to the torso or the beginning or the origin point of a tissue, and distal meaning further from the torso or away from, or furthest away from the origin of the tissue. Hopefully this has helped clarify why you need to know these anatomical terms, and also helped you better understand these spatial terms as well. We'll see you next time.